Shalom and welcome again to Secrets of Meaning, the podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. Welcome, I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. And if you'd like to contact us with ideas or suggestions or other comments, feel free to email me at rabbi@jewishsacredaging.com. We welcome back a returning visitor to Secrets of Meaning, Rabbi Stephen Moss, and discuss his latest book, that's Living and Dying, Jewish Wisdom for Living and Dying, subtitled A Spiritual Journey Through the Prayers and Rituals of Maavor Yabok and Sefer HaHayiim. Disclosure, this is probably not a beach book. If you're looking for something to read on the cruise, you could read it on the cruise, but you'll probably gather a crowd as you read it on the deck. First of all, Rabbi Moss, Steve, welcome. Welcome back. It's good to see you. Hope you're feeling well. Hope all is good.
Thank you. Yes. Good to see you again, Richard.
It's good to be seen too at this day and age.
Yes.
So this is a very, very interesting book. It's not light reading. We can establish that. It's text based. There's a lot of great texts in here, some tremendous interpretations around the idea of end-of-life concerns, drawn from two very, very distinct traditional sources that you examine, and I know that you teach a lot around the country. What was the motive? What brought you? I know you in the introduction you talk about this is really your thesis on steroids. So talk to me about the motivation for writing Jewish Wisdom for Living and Dying.
Well, I'll have to take you back to 1974. I was at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion in New York. And as every graduating and ordained student needs to do, I needed to do a thesis. And at that time, my thesis advisor was Rabbi Eugene Borowitz. He should rest in peace. And I was, from the third year of rabbinical school, very involved in hospital visits and nursing assisted living facilities, but probably the facility that had the greatest impression upon me, my life then and forevermore, was being actually, as it turned out to be for 30 years, one of the chaplains at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in Manhattan, one of the most important cancer institutes in the world. And so for my thesis idea, I was kind of drawn into the stacks at HUC, Hebrew Union College. And I began to become interested in the question as to what are the sources in our Jewish tradition that help us to not only confront the issues of illness, dying, and death, but also what are the sources for the prayers, the rituals, etc., which I must say we really weren't taught to the fullest extent, as I've learned over the years, during rabbinical school. And so I went into the stacks, which you could do in those days, and I began to walk around in the prayer section, and I believe I was drawn to Maavor Yabok. There were at least 24 different editions of Maavor Yabok, both in the long form as well as in a kitzur, an abridged version edition. So I was fascinated by that book from that moment on, and that became the basis of my thesis. I already also was very interested in Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism, actually going back into my childhood. And Maavor Yabok, written in 1626 in Mantua, Italy, by Rabbi Aaron Berechia, is both a text on death and dying in one way, but also with heavy Kabbalistic influence. But for the thesis, I just couldn't analyze Maavor Yabok, but rather I then compared it to another book written almost 100 years later in Amsterdam by a Simon Frankfurter. And this book was also what is called a manual for the Chevra Kadisha at that time. For those of you, our listeners who are not familiar, a Chevra Kadisha, literally a holy brotherhood, is made up of men and women, doesn't have to be only from a traditional community, who are there for Bikur Cholim, for visiting the sick, caring for the dying, as well as preparing the dead for burial, and obviously for the customs of funeral, etc. afterward. Maavor Yabok was particularly interesting for me because as Aaron Berekia notes from the very beginning of his text, it was written for a community of the Chevra Kadisha in Mantua, Italy, which was yearning to find the spiritual sources and resources for the rituals that they were performing. As I've learned over these many decades since I've been working in the book, and by the way, in a sense, in 1974, in order to prepare for this, there is no and has never been any English translation of Yabok. So I've actually spent these 50 years, almost 50 years now, in translating Yabok. And I am actually moving through it, and actually once a week through an excellent organization called Kavod V'Nachum, which, Richard, you are very familiar with, which is the National Chevra Kadisha organization. I have had now for 4 years a once-a-week class going through my translation. That's going to be my next book.
So in the middle, in talking about Maavor Yabok, you write, quote, "We need to write a new one for the 21st century," unquote. Why?
The Chevra Kadisha members that I've met both through Kavod V'Nachum and other organizations, they too are yearning to understand the spiritual underpinnings of what they do. Let me give you an example of a beautiful ritual, which sadly enough is not taken on by many, and certainly those in the more liberal community in the Jewish community, and that is tahara, of washing the body, preparing it for burial. There is a beautiful ritual in which water is placed and run down from the top of the head to the feet. And then there's also actually a process of washing the body from the head to the bottom of the feet. In Maavor Yabok, what Berechia does is not only does he describe the process, after all, as has been pointed out in Maavor Yabok, but other texts as well, and that is the fulfillment of a mitzvah only requires the doing of the mitzvah. So by washing the body, you're fulfilling the mitzvah, period, and saying the appropriate prayers as you go down the parts of the body and wash each one of them, hopefully in a loving and spiritual manner. It's sort of like doing Kiddush on Friday nights for Shabbat. Simply by offering the bracha, the prayers, you fulfilled the mitzvah and you drink the wine. However, the question is, and I'm not going to go into this now, what does that prayer mean in terms of the spiritual underpinnings of the very universe, which is why it's required that one holds the Kiddush cup in the right hand. But that's another podcast. However, for this one, let me go back to Tahara. In Maavor Yabok, he spends quite a few pages actually describing how there's a meditation for each part of the body. So that as you're washing the head, you are not only washing the head, but actually washing the spiritual form of the head in another dimension, which will affect the neshama of the person as it is going on its journey, as the top of the head is aligned with the higher spiritual realms called the Sefirot, the one of Keter. And as you go down each part of the body, he describes the process. What this means is that there is a slowing down of the ritual, because as Berechia and other Kabbalists point out, and actually non-Kabbalists as well have pointed out in the many writings regarding any ritual or ceremony or mitzvah, is that it is truly not enough just to fulfill the mitzvah and do it, but rather a kavanah, a spiritual intention, hooking the ritual itself to the higher spiritual worlds, and thereby awakening a flow of human energy from below to above, and the spiritual energy from above to below. That is the beautiful of this text.
Steve, you alluded to this, and there's an increase, and Kavod V'Nachum is a representative of this. There's an increase in conversation and interest around end-of-life issues, death cafes, the Shomer Collective, other organizations that are popping up. What's going on, Steve, in your opinion? What is it? The faith that our generation is now understanding that, we can't elude mortality no matter how much we go to the gym. What's your sense? What's this? You use the word spiritual yearning a lot. Talk to me about what's going on here now.
I think that during an age, particularly in which we're living in which there is so much flux, there is so much tension there in the world that we experience, and I think that there's a yearning to get down below to that spiritual realm to help us maneuver through this world of chaos in which we're living in, a very frightening world, to say the least. And certainly this has been seen throughout time. There are those who say that many of the Kabbalistic writings developed during the period of the Inquisition in Spain. And it was a way of those Kabbalists at that time trying to deal with how does one find God in the midst of all of this chaos. The same thing with the Hasidic movement in Poland in the 18th century, when there was just so many terrible things going on in the Jewish community. And the beautiful of spirituality on the search for that is that, well, take for instance the metaphor, the image of the ocean. You could have a tremendous amount of wave movement on the ocean. You could have storms on the top of the ocean, but ultimately way down below, it is totally calm and unaffected by what's going on the top. That is what I think people are yearning for. And Richard, going back to the previous question, I think that's why to take a text like Yabok, which I understand, after all, it was written in the 17th century. The way that we view the world in which we live in, the way that we view God in our relationship with the divine is quite different from moderns. So we need to take the idea of helping to find the spiritual underpinnings that are described in Kabbalah, and then rewriting them in a way that people can understand it today, and thereby apply it, of course, to, first of all, dealing with the sick, dying, and the dead, but also in our general lives. What's very interesting is when my study group began on Thursday afternoons, by the way, from 1 to 2:30, we welcome students always. We're now into our 4th year, is that in the beginning, the students thought, oh, this is going to be Yabok talking about the rituals pertaining to the Chevra Kadisha, which was the over 24 students that I had in the very beginning. What they began to find out very quickly, only a small part of Yabok deals with the actual rituals and ceremonies. The rest of Yabok is how to live life in preparation for our dying and our death, which of course all of us will meet. I've been involved in the thanatology movement, the study of death and dying, at least maybe close to 60 years. And I've come to understand that as we can understand what it is as best as any human being can, death and dying, is that in truth, actually, it moves us back to understand how to live. And that's really what Yabok is all about.
Steve, are you afraid of dying?
No, I don't think so. Actually, what I try to do in my own spiritual yearnings is actually to prepare for death in that sense, to understand, as we're taught in our tradition, and not just the Kabbalistic tradition, that ultimately all of us are going to face that. But the question is, how do we prepare our neshama, our soul, for its spiritual journey? As I point out to the Chevra Kadisha members in our class, you're not just washing a body, you're actually washing a soul for its journey. So I understand I have a neshama. Actually, there are 5 parts of the neshama: the nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechida. And I hope to be more reflective and aware that I'm working on this all the time for my own death. There's actually a meditation which I think I've developed, but I probably have borrowed from many sources, in which when I breathe in, just like a baby being born, I take on and say, thank you, God, for my life. And as I exhale, I breathe out and say, God, I'm giving back my breath to you, my life, because this might be the last breath that I take. Well, this ritual is in a sense a preparation for death by, in a sense, understanding what it is to live life, to take it in, and ultimately to let it out, because life is so fragile. Certainly 30 years of Sloan Kettering, experiencing the ups and the downs, but particularly, unfortunately, the difficulties of facing cancer. I understand that any moment, any of us can be stricken with an illness, a severe illness, and therefore, what does it really do? To appreciate life.
Do you personally, you teach this, and you studied it. Are you looking forward to some sort of spiritual life after physical death?
Most definitely. I've come strongly to believe in reincarnation. I do want to say two things in regards to this. Is that my grandmother's grandfather was the last rabbi in our family. And what's very interesting is I have a portrait of his face, his upper body, so to speak.
Rabbi Turkowitz,
and he and
right?
I have the same face. His name was Zev Wolf Turbowitz. He lived in Krozhai, Lithuania. And actually 4 years ago, visiting Lithuania, I was actually able to visit his grave, which was like extraordinary to find it in a unfortunately a dilapidated Jewish cemetery in Krozhai, Lithuania. Anyway, he and I have the same face. For a matter of fact, a number of years ago, when I met his son-in-law in Pittsburgh, and his son-in-law, Aaron Kessler, was 91 years old. When I knocked on the door of the apartment, of course, I had called and told him I was coming. It wasn't total surprise. He opened the door and he almost fainted. He almost fell over because he thought his father-in-law, the rabbi, was reincarnated and came back to life. So I do believe that a part of the neshama of Rabbi Turbowitz is a part of me. But the other is, I really can't explain why I have, in quotes, and I say this with all humility, some facility in translating Maavor Yabok. I don't understand it, particularly given my upbringing, my ultra-reformed Jewish upbringing, my ability to translate this text and to somehow understand it and teach it to others. I've spoken to this to my Kabbalah teacher in Jerusalem, Eliyahu Shir, and he has agreed with me in terms of Gilgul, or reincarnation in Jewish tradition. I do believe that the part of the neshama of Aaron Berechia is within me, which enables me somehow to do this. So if I can believe that the neshamot, the souls of the people of the past, can be through me, then I also believe that, and I pray that my neshama will also continue, and who knows where the journey is. According to Chaim Vital, one of the great Kabbalists of all time, as he said, we actually have up to 1,000 different Gilgulim lifetimes to go through to improve our spiritual state. Well, I think I'm on that journey. The question is, am I on 842 or 732? What lifetime am I on? Who knows?
Could be number 2, or it's number 3.
You got a long way to go.
You got a long way. Yeah, listen, there's a part in the daily Amidah, if I'm not mistaken, which prays for healing, not a cure. And when I teach this, it's always amazing. The lay people, people say, "Oh, that's true. Look, we pray for healing." Talk to me about, in your work and in your understanding drawn from your studies, the idea that one can be spiritually healed without being cured of a disease.
What does healing actually mean? That is, I think, the question that you're asking. And ultimately, when a person, and I don't say this lightly at all, and I know so many people who are suffering on many different levels in life, physically, emotionally, spiritually, is again that image of the ocean. And that is when we're able to find this sense and understanding through our religious traditions of our Jewish tradition, that there is an understanding that God is with us, regardless of what we are going through. Then we have the ability to then, regardless of what is happening, we're able to go through it. And if there's a cure, there's a cure. If there is no cure, then we have to adjust ourselves, obviously, and it's not easy, but we are able to find that peace, shalom within. In Kabbalah, the understanding is that there are numerous dimensions and worlds in which we live in. But there is underlying all of them, the Or Ein Sof, the light of the divine being that is within. And when we can find that through all the things that we go through in life, then no matter how good it is or how bad it is, which are only valences, judgments that we put on experiences of life. Obviously, what could be good for one person could be terrible for another person. An example that I like to use in my classes is You're in a parking lot at a mall. And how many of us, I don't know, when we start driving up and down every one of the rows, we start praying, oh God, I got it. What's going on here? Help me. Sometimes we even say that if it's really a difficult situation. And then all of a sudden, the best parking spot in the entire lot opens up. I don't know about you, how many times you said this. I have, I know others have. You say, oh, thank God, look at that. That person pulled out. I can walk right to the store. But my question becomes then is, when it turns out to be that no matter how hard you try, how much time you spend, you end up parking in the furthest spot that you could imagine from where you are intending to go. The question becomes, can you say thank you, God, for that lousy spot? That's the whole question. And I do believe, and this is, by the way, this is one of my practices, spiritual practices I do. The crap of life, as well as the beautiful things in my life, I try as best as possible to offer a prayer of gratitude, because guess what? Stuff of life comes to us, but when we are spiritually oriented, if we can believe that all comes from God in terms of healing, then the question is, what is healing? That's why during my years at Sloan Kettering, and even to this day when I visit people in hospitals and all, I will never pray for them for complete healing, because what does that even mean sometimes? As I think I mentioned this in the book, actually, one of the floors that I specialized on at Sloan Kettering was in pediatrics. I was walking on the floor, and this boy's grandmother came up to me and said, a grandson is in a coma right now. He is filled with 40 tumors in his lungs. Can I recite the book of the prayers from the Psalms, the book of the Psalms of David for him? I, of course, said yes, because that's the way I'm oriented. I understood that's one of the things that we in our Jewish tradition can do, and that is to be able to offer a prayer no matter how difficult the situation is. So I walked into the boy's room. He was in the coma, but I sat down next to him. I put my right hand on his hand, held it, and I began to recite the Psalms. But then what was interesting was that my mind took over, and it began asking questions. I began to say, what am I doing? What am I praying for? Do I pray that he can be completely healed and open his eyes and there are no tumors in his lungs? Well, there are such things called spontaneous remissions, but is that something I could pray for? No. And then another question came in my mind. I said, well, should I pray that his lungs, the tumors in his lungs, be gone? Well, the thing is that would be wonderful. But the question is, do I pray then that he awaken from the coma? Well, the fact is the coma is the way the body shuts itself down from pain. So to wake up from the coma but still have the tumors, that's not good either. I then said, well, do I sit here and do I pray that he die, that he pass away? Well, in a sense, this is probably the most effective prayer of all, and our Jewish tradition does allow us to do this because that would bring peace to him, to his grandma, to his family as well. But after I went through all of these and other questions, what was very interesting was all of a sudden the question stopped. My mind stopped bothering me and bringing these questions up, quieted down, and all of a sudden, for the first time, I felt my hand in his and his hand in mine. When I was so absorbed with my mind and the questions, I was not with him. But once my mind calmed down, I then felt our hands within each other. I felt the connection between my neshama and his neshama, and I then felt actually the presence of God. And I knew God was in that room. And basically, it's not about healing in the way that we think about it. It's about God being with us through all the experiences of life, both when there is healing and when there cannot be, in the sense of, well, whatever that means under the circumstances of each person, but also to know that God is with us. And that to me was the answer to my prayers.
Is there some sense of then what you're describing in that in that scenario, the word acceptance or the word surrender, not in the military sense, but in essence, giving your soul over to that which is unexplainable? Is that
you hit it? Yeah. That's the acceptance, surrender, meaning surrendering it over to the fact is, something, no matter what, God is with us, similar to my first book in the title. And I thank you for that podcast. God is with me. I have no fear. The end of Adon Olam, Adonai Li V'lo Ira. That's what it's really all about. And it's interesting, in all of the spiritual things that I've gone through and the retreats I've gone through and my own personal experiences every day with God, these are all called what? Spiritual practices, because that's what life really is. I think within our Jewish tradition, we are taught over and over again that life is a practice. To get it is right, is whatever that even means, in order to prepare our neshama for its journey into the infinite and with the infinite as well.
So I got to ask you this question because it's coming up in a lot more classes now that we're doing as part of our work in Jewish sacred aging. And when we get into some of these conversations, like you're talking about, and again, we're talking to Rabbi Steve Moss on his new book, Jewish Wisdom for Living and Dying. Suppose, Rabbi Moss, I don't believe in any kind of supernatural God. I mean, you're asking me to do all this rituals and prayer, but I don't believe in anything out there. What? Well, then why do it? It's why? Talk to me.
Well, first of all, one thing is you're doing a Jewish thing. Certainly during my years at Sloan Kettering and also my years doing a lot of hospice work, when all the doctors and everyone says there's nothing more you can do, this is the end. In Jewish tradition, there's always something we can do. And I do believe that even the most skeptical person at all, simply by being involved in a ritual or a prayer of some sort, will bring some level of comfort. Even in the back of their rational mind, they say, there's nothing that I'm praying to at all. But you're part of this line of tradition that is obviously thousands of years old. And I think that this can bring a level of comfort even to the atheist, let us say, doing a Jewish thing. And whether, and again, what is it, Pascal's wager? I'd rather, if I believe in God, and there is a God, I'm ahead. If I don't believe in God and there is a God, well, that's too bad, right? And so why not? This is what I would say to that person. I think that you'd find comfort. I remember there was one woman, I walked into her room. She was breathing very, very belaboredly, probably from lung cancer. And I introduced myself. She was looking up at me, and she said to me, "Rabbi, can you kill me? I can't stand this breathing anymore. I can't take it." And I always felt that you have to be honest with everyone, and especially in situations like this. So I took her hand and I said to her, "I want you to know, if I could take your life right now, I would. But I hope that you understand I cannot. But I certainly could offer a prayer for us to say as best as possible together so that you can find shalom, so that you can find peace and be able to at least go to sleep right now to find a little bit of that peace from this terrible coughing you're going through." And so I began to chant the Shema in a very slow way. And I asked her, even if it's just a whisper or moving your lips, to try to do the same with me. Understanding, of course, that the prayer, the Shema, is also the last prayer that we're supposed to say before we pass away. And within a few moments, she went off to sleep. Now, I don't know if she was a believer or not, or a skeptic or not, or an atheist or not. That ritual enabled her to answer that prayer, at least for the moment, of finding peace.
So that leads me to this last question before we start running out of time. And that is, and you have a whole section in the book on this, the power of the vidui, the confessional. What is it? How does it find its place? Because the confessional, the confession, the vidui.
In Yabok, certainly he spends a tremendous amount of time on the viduim. Very, very, very lengthy confessions. Actually, my class, we quite often we laugh and we say, something, this is like the end scene in an opera where the person is dying for like 20 minutes and still singing, okay? if anyone were to actually go through all the rituals for the dying in Maavor Yabok, well, you'd probably never die. It's very extensive. But as I'm sure you know, Richard, is that actually there are people within even the liberal and reform community right now who are writing modern viduim, modern confessions. And it's a way of kind of, what is that expression? Putting one's house in order. There was a man that I was visiting in a local hospital in Long Island, where my congregation was for 47 years, who was dying. And he said to me, Rabbi, what can I now do? What can I do? I'm dying. And I recalled immediately the scene from the end of Bereshit, of Genesis, from the Torah, of when Jacob called together his sons and offered words, not only a blessing, but instruction for each one of them. And I said to him, you have quite a large family. Why don't we invite them into your room and you be able to speak to each one of them? And he did this. It was such a beautiful ceremony. Not only did he give each one a blessing, and not only did he critique each one's life and offer some suggestions, but also he spoke about the way he lived with them. It was like a release of the stuff, the baggage that could bring one down, because let's face it, part of the idea of the spiritual journey of Gilgul, of reincarnation, of moving on, is that within each life further, we do bring, in quotes, the spiritual baggage with us. And a vidui, a confession, is a way of putting that baggage aside. And Jewish tradition does allow for deathbed confessions in which one is able to be released from the negativity of one's life to really take on a new positive sense of where one is going for one's eternal future.
Yeah. And more of our colleagues in the non-Orthodox tradition, because I've been involved with a couple of these actually in the recent years, the reemergence of the vidui, I think it's become a very, very powerful trend now. People are starting to understand that this is it is, whether it's closure, however you want to put it, but it means something to the entire family. It is an institutionalization of goodbye that is very, 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 very powerful.
Well, this is why I'm hoping there can be a new Maavor Yabok. And Richard, I'll see in a couple of years for my next book, which I'm actually working on. What's very interesting is the longest chapter in Maavor Yabok is chapter 7 from the first of the 5 sections of the book. It is probably close to 150 pages in the English translation. And it actually is all of the rituals and ceremonies that I've been sharing with you today and talking about in my book, etc., going from sickness to death and beyond. And what I'm doing is writing this for future generations to be used in a very productive way. That is my prayer. That's my hope.
Well, Steve, that's a great Gilgul, and it's a good, and just we'll welcome you back. That you can give us the Moss translation of Maavor Yabok. We look forward to that, and look, maybe it'll be a Netflix series. The way things are going, you never know.
Yeah. Well, Rich, I do want to thank. If I may conclude by saying thank you to all that you do, the Jewish Sacred Aging website, which I write on sometimes, for
yes, you do.
Yeshua for the work that you do in bringing all of these very important subjects to our community.
Thank you very much, Steve. And again, the book is Jewish Wisdom for Living and Dying. The subtitle is A Spiritual Journey Through the Prayers and Rituals of Maavor Yabok and Sefer HaHayiim, Rabbi Steve Moss. Available through the great God Amazon and hopefully as many local bookstores as you can get. Steve, thank you very much. Toda Rabbi. Stay healthy.
Shalom.
Stay safe. Be careful. Be careful of those parking lots in Florida because you do a lot of prayers in those parking lots.
Most definitely.
Most definitely. To all of you, thank you very, very much for joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. If you'd like to, and we do appreciate, if you'd like to make a tax-free donation to help secure and continue our work, please go to the website, jewishsacredaging.com, and click on the conveniently located donate button. And as Rabbi Moss was talking about, he does write for us. And if you feel so inspired, if you'd like to write something for the website, please get in touch with me. Rabbi address at jewishsacredaging.com. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the studios of Lubetkin Media in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and a continuing shout out to our genius guru, Steve Lubetkin. To all of you, thank you very, very much for joining on this edition of Seekers of Meaning. We look forward to seeing you on our next podcast, TV show. In the meantime, please take care of yourself, stay safe, stay healthy, and be kind to one another. Shalom.